In the blistering heat of Saudi Arabia's deserts, a boy was born into unimaginable wealth. His name was Osama bin Muhammad bin Awad bin Laden, the 17th son of a billionaire construction magnate. His father, Muhammad bin Laden, was no ordinary man. He built royal palaces, airports, and mosques for the Saudi royal family. But while his brothers drove luxury cars and studied abroad, young Osama was different. He preferred the silence of the desert over parties. He prayed more than he played. And when people looked into his eyes, they said there was something haunting there, something that made them uneasy. One night, when Osama was still a teenager, he walked out into the dunes near Jeddah. The stars were cold and endless. He whispered to himself that he was chosen for something great, something that would change the world. A few months later, his father died in a helicopter crash. Many said it was an accident. Others whispered that it was an omen. Osama didn't cry. He simply stared into the sky and said softly, "The world is built by men who destroy." No one understood what he meant. Not yet. Osama was only in his early 20s when he made a decision that stunned everyone around him. He left behind his wealth, his cars, and his golden family name, and went to a country most Saudis feared even to speak about, Afghanistan. It was the early 1980s, and the land was on fire. Soviet tanks rolled through Afghan villages, crushing homes and faith alike. But Osama didn't go there to hide. He went there to fight. When he arrived, the air was thick with smoke and the cries of war. Yet, strangely, he looked calm. Locals remembered him as the tall Arab who always carried a Quran and rarely smiled. He built tunnels, trained fighters, and even brought construction equipment from Saudi Arabia to dig trenches. People called him the Builder Mujahid, the holy warrior who could turn rubble into fortresses. But there was one night that changed everything. A Soviet helicopter crashed near his camp. As Osama approached the wreck, the twisted metal still burned red. Inside, a wounded Soviet pilot begged for help. Osama looked at him in silence for a long time. Then he turned away. "Mercy," he whispered, "is for those who fight for God." The next morning, the pilot was gone. From that day, something inside Osama shifted. He wasn't just a fighter anymore. He believed he was chosen. The war in Afghanistan was brutal, but it gave Osama something he had never found in Saudi Arabia: purpose. He fought beside men from Egypt, Yemen, Pakistan, and even Europe. They saw him as a hero, a rich man who had chosen danger over comfort. But Osama saw something darker. He saw how war could unite people through fear, faith, and revenge. In 1988, deep in the Afghan mountains, Osama gathered a small group of trusted fighters inside a cave. They sat around a flickering lantern, their faces half lit by the flame. Osama laid out a single piece of paper, names, places, and code words written in Arabic. "This," he said quietly, "is Al-Qaeda, the base." No one in that cave knew that this moment would change world history. It wasn't just an army. It was an idea, invisible, loyal, and deadly. From that cave, messages were carried across borders like whispers in the wind. Training camps were built in the mountains. Money flowed from secret accounts. Fighters arrived from every corner of the Muslim world. And yet, in the shadows, another storm was forming. The Soviet Union began to collapse, and the world thought the war was ending. But Osama wasn't finished. He looked at his followers and said, "The enemy that comes next will be far greater, and it will come wearing a smile." When Osama bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia in 1989, he was greeted like a legend. Crowds called him the Lion of Jihad, the man who helped drive out the mighty Soviets. Even the royal family praised him at first. Newspapers wrote about his courage, his faith, his sacrifice. But the celebration didn't last. Osama began giving fiery speeches, warning that another enemy was coming, not from the north, but from the west. He said the Americans were poisoning the Muslim world with greed and corruption. He accused the Saudi rulers of bowing to them. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, Osama offered to defend Saudi Arabia himself with his Afghan fighters. But the king refused. Instead, he invited the U.S. military to protect the kingdom. That was the moment everything broke. Osama was furious. "Foreign soldiers," he said, "have defiled the land of the Prophet." He went from hero to traitor almost overnight. His phone was tapped. His speeches were banned. And one night, his passport was quietly taken from him. But before the government could silence him completely, Osama disappeared. He didn't go back to Afghanistan. He went somewhere even more dangerous, a place where dictators and fanatics traded loyalty for gold. He went to Sudan. And there, in the dusty outskirts of Khartoum, a new kind of empire began to rise, one that would soon send shockwaves across the world. When Osama bin Laden arrived in Sudan in the early 1990s, he wasn't hiding. He was building. He bought farms, banks, and construction companies. He wore simple clothes and prayed in local mosques. But behind those calm eyes, something dangerous was growing. He began to gather the men who had once fought beside him in Afghanistan, men who owed him their lives. Together, they created a web of connections across the Middle East, Africa, and even Europe. It wasn't just a group anymore. It was a network. At night, in a compound outside Khartoum, Osama sat at a wooden desk with maps spread before him. There were red circles around New York, Nairobi, Riyadh, and Aden. His voice was calm when he spoke. "We will strike them not in the open desert," he said, "but in their glass towers and shining streets." The people around him didn't fully understand what he meant, but soon the world would. In 1992, a hotel in Yemen, one often used by American troops, exploded in the night. A few years later, mysterious bombings hit U.S. targets in Saudi Arabia and Africa. Every time, Osama's name appeared in whispers, never proof, just smoke. But intelligence agencies began to notice a pattern. He was building something much larger than anyone imagined. A shadow army that didn't need borders, uniforms, or even a country. By 1996, the Sudanese government had had enough. Under pressure from the West, they expelled him. But the exile didn't weaken him. It sent him straight back to the one place where the world couldn't reach him, the wild mountains of Afghanistan. And there, the spider began to weave his deadliest web yet. When Osama bin Laden crossed the border into Afghanistan in 1996, the land was once again in chaos. The Soviets were gone, but the country had collapsed into a brutal civil war. Warlords fought over cities, and gunfire echoed through the valleys. But in the south, a new force was rising, a mysterious group of students and fighters calling themselves the Taliban. They were young, disciplined, and ruthless, and they wanted to build an Islamic state. Osama saw them as destiny. He met their leader, Mullah Omar, in the dusty city of Kandahar. The two men spoke privately for hours inside a simple mud-walled house. When they emerged, Osama's followers said his face was glowing with determination. "We will build a fortress for faith," he told them, "and from it, the world will tremble." The Taliban gave him protection in exchange for his money, his fighters, and his experience. In the mountains of Tora Bora, Osama built training camps hidden among the rocks. Every month, hundreds of men arrived, from Egypt, Pakistan, Yemen, and even the West. They trained, they prayed, and they learned to disappear. U.S. intelligence soon realized he was back. Stronger, richer, and more dangerous than ever. But by the time they began searching for him, he had already vanished into the caves. Then, one quiet evening in 1998, Osama appeared on video for the first time in years. Dressed in camouflage, his rifle beside him, he declared, "America will taste fear, as our people have tasted it for decades." That message spread across the world. A few months later, the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania exploded, killing hundreds. And for the first time, the name Osama bin Laden appeared on the FBI's most wanted list. The world was beginning to realize this was not just a man hiding in the mountains. It was a storm preparing to strike. August 20th, 1998. The sky above Afghanistan was quiet, until it wasn't. Hundreds of miles away, President Bill Clinton had just given an order. American warships in the Arabian Sea launched Tomahawk missiles toward a remote desert camp near Khost. Their target, Osama bin Laden. Inside the camp, Osama had just finished evening prayers when the ground began to shake. A deafening roar filled the air. Fire erupted from the horizon. Fighters screamed and dove for cover as explosions ripped through tents and vehicles. When the dust cleared, the camp was in ruins. Dozens were dead, but Osama bin Laden, somehow, had escaped. He had left the camp just hours earlier, traveling to another hideout in the mountains. Some of his men called it divine protection. Osama himself smiled faintly and said, "They can see with satellites, but they cannot see destiny." That night, as the surviving fighters buried their dead, Osama made a decision. He realized America would never stop coming for him. So, he would strike first, not in the deserts of Arabia, not in Africa, but in the heart of the enemy's own empire. He gathered his most trusted men, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and others, and listened in silence as a new plan was whispered. Something so bold that even his lieutenants hesitated. Osama only nodded and said, "If you want to shake the world, you must strike the sky." The room fell silent. No one dared to speak. But those words, "strike the sky," would soon become the prophecy of a day that would change history forever. In the cold valleys of Afghanistan, far from the eyes of the world, Osama bin Laden began his most secret project. He called it the Plan of the Sky. It started with just an idea, small, unbelievable, almost insane. But slowly, quietly, it took shape. Osama's trusted lieutenant, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, came to him with details. Men who could enter the United States legally. Men who could learn to fly. Men who were willing to die. Osama listened without emotion. Then he simply said, "Let them learn to fly, but not to land." Soon, the chosen ones began to arrive. Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shai, Ziad Jarrah, and others. They trained in Afghanistan's desert camps, then slipped through Pakistan, Germany, and finally into the United States. No one noticed them. They rented apartments, took flying lessons, and lived quiet, invisible lives. Their neighbors thought they were students. Their instructors thought they were just nervous beginners. Meanwhile, Osama moved deeper into the mountains, protected by the Taliban. He rarely appeared in public now, but when he did, his men said he looked different, calmer, almost serene. He prayed for hours and spoke softly of a day of fire that would wake the world from its sleep. By the summer of 2001, the final pieces were in place. Money was moved. Plane tickets were bought. The targets were chosen. In a dark cave lit by a single lantern, Osama looked at a map of America. He touched 4 points with his finger: New York, Washington, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and whispered, "They built towers to touch heaven. Let them fall back to earth." And as the world prepared to celebrate a new century of peace, the men he trained were preparing to end it in flame. It was a clear, perfect morning, September 11th, 2001. The sun rose over New York City like any other day. People rushed to work, taxis honked, and the sky was the color of glass. At 8:46 a.m., everything changed. American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked by Osama's followers, roared over Manhattan and slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The explosion echoed through the city. At first, people thought it was an accident, a terrible, random tragedy. But then, 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 appeared in the sky. Live on television, millions watched as it struck the South Tower. Fire, smoke, and disbelief filled the air. The Twin Towers, symbols of America's power, burned like torches. And far away, in a cave in Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden watched news reports on a small television brought by his aides. He leaned forward, eyes fixed, and when the second tower fell, he whispered, "Allahu Akbar. The towers of arrogance have fallen." But the nightmare wasn't over. At 9:37 a.m., another hijacked plane, Flight 77, smashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And just before 10 a.m., Flight 93, meant for the U.S. Capitol, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. By 10:28 a.m., both towers were gone. New York was covered in ash and silence. Thousands were dead. Millions watched in horror. Across the globe, governments, armies, and intelligence agencies moved in panic. The United States declared it an act of war. But in the mountains of Afghanistan, Osama and his followers were already disappearing into tunnels, into shadows, into legend. The world had changed forever. Within hours of the attacks, the United States was a nation transformed. Skies were silent, airports empty, and fear ran through every city. But behind the grief, there was rage, and one name echoed through every intelligence briefing, every news broadcast, every whispered conversation: Osama bin Laden. By mid-October 2001, America struck back. The operation was called Enduring Freedom. Missiles, bombers, and special forces descended on Afghanistan, targeting Taliban strongholds and the mountain caves of al-Qaeda. In the frozen peaks of Tora Bora, Osama's followers scrambled to move him from one hideout to another. The mountains thundered with explosions day and night. He rarely slept. He ate little, but when his men asked if he was afraid, he only smiled and said, "The hunter cannot find what God has hidden." American troops came within kilometers of his position. Intercepted radio messages revealed his voice, calm, steady, giving orders. They dropped leaflets promising rewards, interrogated prisoners, followed every trail. And yet, somehow he slipped away. Some say he escaped through a cave passage into Pakistan. Others claim he was carried across the border by loyal tribesmen in the back of a truck under a pile of oranges. Whatever the truth, when the smoke cleared, he was gone. The world's most powerful armies couldn't find one man. And that man, now a ghost, had just become the symbol of defiance to his followers and the face of evil to everyone else. Osama bin Laden had vanished into history's shadows. But he was far from finished. After Tora Bora, Osama bin Laden disappeared into the rugged borderlands of Pakistan and Afghanistan. No one knew exactly where he was, only that he was alive, moving silently, always one step ahead of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies. For years, he lived like a shadow. In small villages, he changed his appearance. He grew longer hair, a fuller beard, sometimes a scarf to hide his face. He avoided phones, internet, and vehicles. Only a few trusted couriers carried messages for him. Meanwhile, the CIA, Mossad, and MI6 were hunting relentlessly. They used satellites, intercepted emails, and infiltrated al-Qaeda cells. Every lead was followed, every whisper analyzed. Yet every time they got close, he vanished. He watched the chaos from afar. The US invaded Iraq in 2003, thinking he might be involved, but he stayed patient, silent, invisible. Inside his hideouts, he met with key lieutenants, planning attacks and sending instructions to followers around the world. He became a ghost not just in space, but in time. No one could touch him. No one could predict him. And as the years went by, the legend grew. Children in the Middle East were told stories of the man who could disappear like smoke. Western media portrayed him as the devil incarnate, a mastermind hiding behind mountains, caves, and shadows. For over a decade, he was untouchable, almost mythic. And then, in the early morning hours of May 2nd, 2011, the story would reach its terrifying climax. After years of searching, the trail led to Abbottabad, Pakistan, a quiet city with tree-lined streets and bustling markets. Hidden among ordinary homes was a compound that looked unremarkable from the outside. Tall walls, barbed wire, and security cameras. For months, U.S. intelligence studied the location. Analysts noticed unusual activity, couriers arriving and leaving, no internet or phone lines, and high walls blocking any view from neighbors. It was Osama bin Laden's hideout. The CIA nicknamed it the Red Fortress. Inside, Osama lived with several family members and trusted followers. He moved through the compound carefully, avoiding detection. Guards patrolled, and escape routes were dug into the ground. For the first time in years, the hunter became the hunted in plain sight. The world didn't know he was there, but the United States now had proof. The tension was unbearable. Every plan had to be perfect. One mistake, and Osama would vanish again, perhaps forever. The world waited in silence, unaware that the final act of a decades-long shadow war was about to unfold. In the early hours of May 2nd, 2011. The world was still asleep, unaware that history was about to be rewritten. From an aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea, a fleet of helicopters took off, carrying the most elite soldiers in the U.S. military, Navy SEAL Team 6. Their mission: infiltrate Osama bin Laden's fortress in Abbottabad, capture or kill the world's most wanted man, and leave no trace of failure. The night was dark, the air tense. The helicopters crossed the border into Pakistan silently, their engines whispering like ghosts. Suddenly, one helicopter faltered and crashed inside the compound. The team froze, hearts pounding. But there was no time to panic. They pressed on. Inside the fortress, Osama slept unaware. He had no idea the end of his story was already in motion. SEALs breached the doors and moved room by room. The tension was unbearable. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every corner could be a trap. And then, finally, they found him. Osama bin Laden, the man who had haunted the world for decades, stared at them. There was no escape, no last-minute flight. In that moment, the shadow that had once moved across deserts, caves, and mountains finally came to an end. By dawn, it was over. Osama bin Laden, the man who had terrorized the world for decades, was dead. His body was taken, identified, and buried at sea. A quiet, unceremonious end for the man who had once sought to shake the world. The news spread like wildfire. Governments, media, and millions of people around the globe reacted with shock, relief, and disbelief. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, his followers mourned, vowing revenge. In the United States, citizens celebrated, but the scars of September 11th still ran deep. For nearly 20 years, Osama had moved like a ghost, building terror networks, orchestrating attacks, and staying one step ahead of the world's most powerful armies. He had transformed from a wealthy boy in Saudi Arabia into the symbol of fear for millions. Yet in the end, even the most elusive shadow cannot hide forever. Osama bin Laden's reign of terror had come to an end, leaving behind lessons about vigilance, the dangers of extremism, and the fragility of peace. Osama bin Laden is gone, but the world he helped shape still bears the scars of his actions. He showed how a single man, fueled by ideology and ruthlessness, could change the course of history. Nations strengthened security. Intelligence agencies evolved. Ordinary people learned the fragility of peace and the cost of ignorance. But Osama's story also serves as a warning. Extremism thrives in silence, in neglect, in places where fear and hate grow unchecked. His rise reminds the world that wealth, power, or faith alone do not prevent a descent into violence, and that one person's vision can ripple across the globe, for better or worse. For students of history and learners of English alike, Osama's story is not just about terror. It is about choices, consequences, and the shadows that linger when the world fails to notice them. And though the shadow of Osama bin Laden has ended, the lessons remain, chilling, urgent, and unforgettable.